All right.
Welcome back to Senate Education. We have Secretary Boucher with us. We are looking at CTE topic in general. Secretary Boucher, we are trying to prepare a bill that everyone is in agreement on, you with the V's by the time we return. And so can you give us an update on how that process is going first? That might be a good way for us to start.
So this morning, I met with the VDs in addition to Emily Simmons, and we did not have time this morning to go in depth into the fiscal portion.
Okay.
We did, and so we're gonna likely meet again
Great.
next week to do that. We talked more at length on the component of the board policy. So the model policy for districts to have around career development for students. And that was a very good conversation. We have agreement that currently, as the language is written, it kind of conflates the what and the how. And so the VSBA and the V's in particular wanted to really clarify that. So the policy should be about the what, and then there will be guidance coming from the agency on the how, also allowing for flexibility at the local level.
Okay.
So we met for half an hour. I mean, this has happened pretty quickly. So, but also on Wednesday, the same of us from AOE, myself and Emily Simmons, met at length with Beth to actually get through what we think is a shared agreement of what the funding language.
Shared agreement with the V's.
No, between just working with Ledge Council and
Okay.
us.
Okay.
So the V's have not seen we gave it to them this morning, but they haven't seen the funding.
Okay. And where does your funding proposal live right now? It's the draft
1.1.
1.1 or 3 or 4. That's your funding proposal. Okay. So
It's our joint, if I may say. I mean, we actually
Well,
did provide our
I know,
funding proposal.
Ms. St. James is very careful.
I
if you
am,
will. Yeah.
I am. I think that, if I may.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think a fair way to represent it is I provided some feedback
Mhm.
from a drafting and kind of basic understanding standpoint of what we would normally see in the green books. And I, asked some clarifying questions that then perhaps led to an internal discussion between AOE that I happened to be privy to because I was in that meeting, that then may have resulted in some changes. But I just want to be very clear that I don't, and I hope the secretary agrees with me, I did not provide any policy suggestions, weigh in on any
Sure.
policy pieces, but I did provide feedback on what does this mean, or gee, that's not something that I've seen in statute before, or, et cetera. Is that fair?
That's perfect. And yes, I did not mean to imply that you were providing policy advice, because that's definitely not what you're doing. And we were acting on, I believe, the direction of the committee to work and make sure that the language fit Ledge Council's requirements in terms of legal constraints.
So just to bring us back to what actually has to happen and for this bill to pass out by the time crossover, we have you slated to come in or ask for that Tuesday after we get back to be with us for several hours to make sure in case any questions come up around CTEs. And we're hoping you'll meet with the V's and others during town meeting week so that the product that we see on that Tuesday would be one of hopefully agreement.
Sure.
Recognizing disagreements can happen in the other body, that kind of thing, but just to get it out and get it moving.
Yes.
Otherwise, I fear it's.
So I teed up a follow-up meeting this morning after the original meeting with the B's, so
Right.
I can't see why that would not happen. Great. At this point.
Great. Any questions from McKinney on procedure from here on out? Not the bill, but just the process that we've asked the secretary to go through with the V's. All this. Yeah, Vermont School Boards Association, principals, superintendents, NEA, okay, that process questions. Okay, Non-process question, please go for it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I heard from a constituent of mine, so I wanted to share this question with you. He was asking, in terms of basing the tuition on a prior year's full-time equivalent, why don't I just read it? Basing tuition on the prior year's full-time equivalent, I think will create highs and lows, peaks and valleys. It can be hard for both high schools and tech centers to navigate. For instance, if the enrollment goes up drastically in the current year, the cost of those enrolled cannot be given the lower enrollment for the prior year. I think the reverse will be true as well. The 6-semester average was designed to address this concern. And then he said, I don't understand what the benefit to moving to this funding model will address. So I wonder if you could speak to that.
So part of what our charge was to take a look at what was in the APA report.
Mhm.
And that was a big recommendation of theirs.
What does that stand for?
It's the name of the
The name of
law.
Is the name of the company?
The name of the
Okay,
company,
thank you.
yeah. And so we reflected on it. We actually thought it makes sense because we knew that the numbers from the 6-semester average were really off in the past few years, and the CTE centers told us that they've been really off. I think we also have sort of corrective factors in this model that will allow and require, if there are any major changes, anticipated in terms of numbers of students, but also programs. So if a CTE is planning to get rid of a program or planning to add a new program, that would actually be part of the calculus as well. So we're trying to actually, and I think we've got it, which is we're really trying to make sure they have enough money to run their programs. They're not getting too much money, because that would be a problem, as we're seeing with other aspects of the ed fund right now. So I think that's that's really our response to that, which is we were directed to actually implement, right, what was in the APA report. And there is agreement on that component of the APA report. I mean, I think you had testimony from the CT directors actually.
So report on, is that report on the website?
Yeah, and Ted took us through it, super high level, yeah. Sarah.
Thank you. Policy question for section 9, I think it was raised, is the
Government
one
section, yep.
yeah, once or twice before, I think the page 10. I think it was requested that we add a 5th category, and I think, I can't remember the exact phrase, but I think it was construction trades or.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess that's just a general comment. Yeah,
I think the committee agreed, was okay with that, Ms. St. James, do you recall?
I think, I was in the room when you all heard testimony from AOE, and I think some of this conversation happened, but I don't think that the committee and me had a conversation about the changes you wanted to see as a result of that. So I'm standing by, I've got my red pen,
Beautiful,
I just made that note.
great, thank you.
Can I follow up a bit on that too? We think that's a fine idea. Really.
We'll do it.
Haven't met with Drake yet. We're working on that.
Great.
She wanted to be part of this conversation. I don't anticipate any challenges with that.
And just to remind everyone, this is the pathways through college and
Yes.
credits, yeah, okay.
Yes. And I just wanted to note that I heard very carefully what the CTE directors are saying about it needs to be more than articulation agreements. So from their perspective, I understand that, but from the state's perspective, we really do need to have a set of articulation agreements that really map out, if you're at Vermont State University, these are the courses that actually are the
Okay.
next step
Mhm.
from the CTE courses. And so that's really what we're trying to do with this. We're really trying to say it's more than about an articulation agreement from each CTE to the college around dual enrollment, for instance. It's broader than dual enrollment. It's really about
Getting credit, graduating.
getting credit in all ways, and then
Yeah.
what are the next steps to finish that
Right.
associate's degree or that bachelor's degree.
Right.
Make that easy for kids to see what that looks like.
Does anybody have any questions for the secretary on governance? We've gone through this section. What I thought we might use our time with whenever it has to do with the funding structure, and have Beth take us through with the administration and has worked on with Ms. St. James. Recognizing we likely see a new draft with maybe changes to governance and finance in a week. But any outstanding questions before we move on? Fine, yes, please.
Thank you very much.
You bet.
Just still asking questions that I received, so I thought I would share them with you.
Senator Fulick is huge into constituent services, huge.
I think, okay.
It's good, no, it's good, it's good.
Um,
That trophy's on its way
Yeah.
to you.
Thank you very much. My question is regarding the comprehensive career development plan, he is wondering, it's the purview of the secretary, but he's also wondering if there could be some language that guides the development of this policy that should include both tech centers and sending schools. So I think it was just,
We can clarify that language. I think that our intent was that that's already there.
okay,
Because it's talking about the districts, which would include ascending schools.
Okay.
But if we can hold that, because we do have updated language on particularly that section after talking to these, that's what I would say for that.
that's fantastic.
And we did send that
That is so great.
to you, but I think you probably just got it, Morgan, before this.
Sorry, what?
You probably just got the testimony on that section before this.
Yeah, I passed it out.
Yeah, that's.
Oh, okay.
I'm just not sure.
How are you gonna start?
One last, this is it.
Doesn't
There-
happen.
There is another one, but it
Yeah.
is not in this bill, so I'm not even gonna bring it up. We can do it some other time. But it's actually a really good idea. But so this is the last question. There's some strong language about evaluating in that evaluation section.
In governance, in.
Yeah, evaluating
What
is,
section?
it's.
It's page 8, I believe.
Page 7, I
7,
think, career technical center
Yep.
evaluation. Strong
Line 12.
language about evaluating effectiveness of career technical centers. It makes me wonder though, sorry if I'm quoting right from the email. Should there be some language about evaluating the school districts and high schools in their development and implementation of numbers 2, 3, and 4 on page 1? And so he's saying in that spirit, there is language about how tech centers will be evaluated on the quote satisfaction of the center's customer groups. Shouldn't high schools be evaluated on the same measurements as tech centers when it makes sense? So I think he's just asking. For. To have the sending sort of an evaluative process for sending schools as well as the tech centers.
Please,
I think,
Secretary.
yeah, I think first of all, we have to do this for all these pieces through Perkins funding. So all of ours are,
Okay, good reminder.
this is really just for
Perkins
reading
funding,
Perkins funding
yeah.
requirements in A. I think this is covered because of the alliance to the alignment with district quality standards. So this is all the kind of stuff that's in district quality standards around facilities, around data, around all that kind of stuff. So I'm happy if you want to send it to me to take a closer look, but I think it's covered already in how we have it. I know that there was some question around if they don't already have to meet district quality standards, like there's the two comprehensive
Mhm.
CTEs. What about them? I mean, they're not part of the district quality standard framework, but all the others are, because they're not technically districts. We're back to like the global education governance.
Yeah.
So the three independent, it's confusing. The three independent CTE centers are themselves districts, so
Like
they're,
mine, I think we have one that's independent.
yes, you have Southwest, right?
Southwest,
Yeah,
got their own board, even though they're kind of school.
and they have to meet
Thing.
DQS.
It's not an independent school, it's an independent
It's a
public
Right.
district.
It's a district. So, and then the others that are attached.
Yeah.
All fall under the district quality standards for their particular SU. It's really like LI and St. J, they don't fit in this.
That's right, Senator Field.
That was really is the last one. This is around the funding, direct funding allocation, I believe. He's saying that he's a proponent for increasing funding for high school graduates who do not attend college or who do not have an employment plan upon graduating. He thinks that this is a bridge year plan in which students can access tech centers. by rule, centers are allowed to charge students with a high school diploma up to 40% of the tuition. This can be a limiting burden for many. We should explore legislation that would, again, this may not be here, but that would allow centers to also charge sending districts a percentage of a full-time equivalent of an FTE for each enrolled adult with a high school diploma. I believe it's appropriate to use DOL funds to offset this cost, and maybe this could. He's saying perhaps S304 can include this language, but it may be too late in the game to do that.
Madam Secretary.
Yeah, and I'm nodding because we have always had a bright line. So once you get your high school diploma, you're no longer, the ed fund no longer applies. And this keeps coming up every year about,
Yeah, I remember that.
about what
thing.
happens with adults who have their high school diploma. They are actually typically during evening
Yeah.
adult CTE courses. Taking, engaging in those programs. But, I mean, I think we've all agreed that, once you get your high school diploma, which is the promise,
Mhm.
that there needs to be another source. And I think that that's what we would continue to work on. I think labor is often, Department of Labor, their federal funds are often what is deployed. We've started as a state to give, some funds also, I think, out of the general fund to BSAC. So for me, it's more about the funding source, which it sounds like he's not saying it should be in the ed fund anyway. I think the governance work that we'll have to do will also address this, because we're gonna have to figure out what is the best way to blend these experiences.
Great.
And that involves the colleges too, because they also are Perkins funded, CCD and tech historically have been.
Thank you.
Good.
Super.
Okay, great.
Yeah, that is.
So I think perhaps, I think the best way for us to use our time before we move on to literacy is for Betsy and James to take us through this section, and then we can pause.
I'll be here, and
That'd be great.
I think Simmons is here somewhere.
Right.
She's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Curiosity question.
Yeah.
Are you intending to today have a conversation about governance in State Board of Education versus daily?
Yeah, and you'll-
No, it's a good question. We have kind of that conversation when we get back on S203, where I think some of that stuff will. Yeah, S203 will kind of bubble up, but no, I think we're going to today just take us through this. Take us through the new version of S204, and then head out. Yeah. St. James, so looks like we're on page 10, section 10, is that correct?
Yes, that's St. James Office of Legislative Counsel, you should be on page 10, section 10. I did not highlight the entire section, so everything after the highlighting, reader assistance heading, that says funding structure is new. And this is the language that the secretary is referring to. I'm gonna walk you through this.
So everything is new from page this on,
Yes,
great, okay, thank you.
even the effective date, a little bit. I'm going to walk you through this, and I am not going to be able to answer all of your questions, which I think is wonderful that the secretary and Emily Simmons are here. So.
Do you have any questions about what has been drafted?
Yes, I don't think it would be productive for us to, they're pretty technical.
Okay.
And I really am going to strongly pitch that you have me share this with JFO
Great,
and have them look at it.
consider it done.
great.
Please do.
So out of staffing with JFO, there may be even more questions.
Okay.
So first section, section 10, starting on line 17, would be adding a new statute to chapter 37, which is the career and technical education, or career technical education chapter. And this statute would be added to subchapter 4, which is the eligibility and tuition subchapter. And the title of it is direct funding allocation to career and technical education. This, rather than have you go to the effective date section, I'll just tell you that this section would take effect July 1, 2025. So July 1, 2025, is the beginning of fiscal year 2026. So, beginning fiscal year 2026, each CTE hosted at a high school and each independent CTE district shall receive, we're gonna go on page 11, a direct funding allocation from AOE based on the funds allocated to the CTE in the previous year. Okay, so that's subsection A, and now we're gonna indent, we're gonna go to subdivision 1, and so everything that falls kind of under A is meant to augment or add context to subsection A, right? So subdivision 1 is the agency shall calculate the direct funding allocation by adding together the following funds received by a CTE in the prior year. Provided, however, that the agency may alter the allocation based on information received pursuant to subdivision 3 of this subsection. So to get the funding allocation, we're gonna add A through D, essentially. So A is the total amount of full-time equivalent student tuition received by the CTE from member districts in the preceding fiscal year. So currently, it's a tuition model, right? Okay. So we add all of that up for the center. We add to the total amount of the state supplemental support grant issued in the prior fiscal year based on full-time equivalent enrollment.
Can I
Yeah,
go-
please.
Just going back to A, just for a second, full-time equivalents, is this a weighted student or is this an unweighted
I
student?
think that is a question. That's a question that occurred to me while we were, as I was typing this up.
It's different districts have obviously different, whole argument, so.
So it's whatever they were paid the previous year, so nothing about how the full-time versus, half-time FTEs, that's not being contemplated to change.
But, okay,
By weighted, I assume you mean that, whether they're a half-time or full-time program.
no, sorry, I meant, English as a second language, poverty index, that whole.
No, that is a whole separate funding model. This is just taking the CTE funds and just kind of sort of looking for. It's not putting it into the broader ed fund. It's just saying like the direct
No,
allocation of
yeah,
CTE.
I understand that, but we're not using the model of weighted students given the additional, resources necessary to equalize the CTE student from one region to the.
But we don't currently.
I know.
It's
I'm
okay,
I'm just trying to,
sorry.
it's curious.
I was gonna add, I believe that CTEs are not considered LDAs in statute. They're like their own. Oh,
Just trying to figure out, so, it was essentially full-time equivalent, which gets me thinking, is that weighted, unweighted? If the answer is no. So my next curiosity, I won't go into it here, is why not, but I'm not gonna, okay, I just wanted to know that.
Good. Thank you for that. Helpful.
I can just say that I shared the earlier version of some of this language with JFO and they had the same initial question, which is, so you may get that again.
Okay.
So, the total amount of state supplemental grants, and that is, looking at my cheat sheet here. I believe, and please correct me if I'm wrong, this is meant to take the place of the, currently what is, going to career and technical centers under section 1561 subsection C, which is on behalf of a sending school district within Vermont, a career technical center shall receive from the ed fund for each full-time equivalent student from the district 87% of the base education amount. An equivalent amount shall be subtracted from the amount due to the sending district under section 411 of this title. That's what we were referring to here, right?
I think the on behalf technically is the student tuition. There's a. I think the on behalf, the way it's worded, has always been the tuition part. I think the other component is like a base amount they
I
get.
need could I have a line, please?
I'm walking through lines 9 and 10. So perhaps that's an area where we
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Have some clarification.
I can weigh in.
Please.
Beth is correct. That is a corresponding payment that is required by 16 VSA 1561B. What's confusing here is we have a payment that we casually call the on behalf of payment internally at the agency. And this section of law also uses the words on behalf of. So that's why I'm being really clear. It's the section that Beth cited, 1561B.
Thank you.
And then C, the third category that we're adding up here is supplemental grants, not to include competitive grants awarded to DTE in prior year. I think we're working on getting a list maybe of what all of those grants might be. Is that accurate?
I have those.
Oh, okay, great.
Okay, thank you.
So they are
Okay, go ahead.
they are the salary assistance grant under 1565, the 1561C, the section after the one I just referred to, which is called supplemental assistance, and the 1563 tech ed transportation assistance, as well as one appropriation that we always see in the big bill every year, which is for equipment innovation and program modernization.
Thank you very much. And then the cost associated with programmatic online 13, the cost associated with programmatic changes at the CPP that impact operational needs. So the first three sections, A, B, and C, are totals from the previous year, and D is, I believe, asking for, were there any changes that may not have been captured in A through B that the agency should be taking into account when they are calculating their direct funding allocation? Ready to move on to line 15? So subdivision 2, the funding allocation for each center developed by the agency for fiscal year 2026 shall include non-competitive supplemental grants allocated pursuant to section 1561 of the title and salary assistance paid pursuant to subdivision 1565(3) of this title. The agency is required to review information provided to the CTE under D, lines 13 and 14 of this section to determine if an increase or decrease to a CTE allocation is necessary to avoid undue overpayment or underpayment of actual operating costs. So A, B, and C may be what the center got last year. The agency is required to take D into account in case A through C are not going to adequately fund or they are going to overfund the center. Okay, page 12, subsection B. Beginning fiscal year 2026, the CTE centers at the two comprehensive high schools. Does everyone know what a comprehensive high school is?
Go ahead and give us a definition.
Okay, so comprehensive high school is defined as a public or independent school other than a career technical center that provides secondary career technical education approved under section 1533 of this title. That is the definition. It's specific to chapter 37, the career tech center. And this is essentially Linden Institute and St. J, the two approved independent schools that have.
Where this.
I just read
No, I know what you read, like where's the,
line 3,
oh,
page
there it
12.
is.
So that's who we're referring to here.
Which two schools?
Right now, I believe that's just Linden Institute and St. Johnsbury Academy. So those two schools would receive a direct funding allocation from AOE based on the previous year tuition charged for CTE students only. Right, so those are approved independent schools. We're not factoring in non-CTE tuition. And prior year supplemental grants to include competitive grants. The agency shall review information provided by the CTE pursuant to the subsection to determine if an increase or decrease to a CTE allocation is necessary to avoid undue overpayment or underpayment of actual operating costs. So same concept here. What were you actually paid last year, and do we need to make any changes to that so that it's not too much and it's not too low? And then C is an inflator. So for each fiscal year, the funding allocation calculated under this section shall be increased by the most recent, so this is the NEEP inflator as of November 15th, for state and local government purchases of goods and services.
So what's the intent of that paragraph C? Is just kind of an automatic adjustment upward or?
My understanding is that this is an intent to capture inflation.
I get that, but it's just kind of an unadjudicated automatic upward.
That's how it is drafted. Section 11, page 12, this is a report requirement on, so what we just walked through, section 10 won't go into effect until July 1, 2025.
Can I just make one observation? Probably. That whole section 10 really smacks of how government perceives how it's a budget. What you spent last year, let's give you a little adjustments here and there, plus inflation as opposed to zero, zero base. Prove it all. It's just an observation, just now. You don't need to comment because
It struck you.
just strikes me as not the most effective way of adjusting programs to with speed.
So student weight. Right, so in other words, I was thinking if we're going through that, what happens if they end up with 15 more students that end up in their program?
Theoretically, that's a directive, 8. Associated programmatic, so that says programmatic changes, but there's more to it than just programmatic changes. That's like adding whatever, aviation tags, like adding with a new course, or deleting. Like,
Senator Sheen.
Okay, I wanted to go back to subsection B on page 12.
sure.
I don't, maybe I missed it and I apologize, but I don't understand why these two specific high schools are getting this section. At first glance, it seems arbitrary, but I'd like to know what's the reason for it? Do you happen to know?
I think that would be a question for AOE to answer.
Yeah, we're talking about the Linden and the St. They both have tech centers.
Yeah, but- So the tuitioning from all the other centers is just for CTE students. So this is really addressing that, because the way sending districts are tuitioned from these two comprehensive high schools, it's a mix of CTE and all the other students attending. So we needed to clarify that this is just the CTE component that they're getting allotted.
Thank
Please go ahead.
Section 11 is a report back to you all and your colleagues on kind of implementation of section 10. So let's go to page 13. So in that report would be due back January 15th of next year. So that report has to include a status update on implementation of the direct funding allocation created under section 10. Summary of communications provided to funding districts, those that operate a high school and those that do not, regarding the change to the district's tuition payment obligation. Preliminary cost and enrollment data by CTE Center, observations regarding preparations for the fiscal year 2026 funding model created under section 10, and any additional recommendations for changes to the funding allocation provisions as a result of the ongoing CTE governance revision work. So implementation update, and then, well, the transition preparation to get there. On or before January 15th, 2026, AOE has to submit another written report to you all and your colleagues on the actual implementation itself of section 10, what we just walked through. Right, that will go into effect on July 1, 2025. So a status update on the transition to career technical education funding allocation. You'll notice that we refer to it as section 10 in subsection A because that section will not take an effect yet. But now in subsection B, we're actually calling out the statute. Identify cost and program participation trends based on data collected to implement the allocation. Any lessons learned and policy recommendations resulting from the implementation of the provisions, which may include, we're moving on to page 14. Recommendations for additional legislative language and overview of the funding construct and program specific allocation development process. Recommendations for transportation funding or other measures designed to address barriers to participation in career tech education. and whether the state should provide incentivized development and expansion of certain CTE programs identified as statewide priorities by increasing funding allocation for those programs or by some other means. And then finally, the report has to include a summary of any additional funding needs or cost pressures on the CTE system identified during the implementation of this act. So right now, correct me if I'm wrong. School districts are, there's some grants that we just walked through, like transportation, salary systems, right? But tuition is coming out of school budgets, right? This is more like a block grant or a census grant. It would be like categorical aid, like off the top of the head. Is that accurate?
Yes, and if I may,
Please.
it's, I would say, better honoring our promise to students, because it's actually treating CTE like another flexible pathway. So we do the same thing for dual enrollment in early college. We don't legally have whether a student can go or not be negotiated around fiscal issues at the local level. Right? So the whole idea is we're actually giving the CTEs the money, they can serve these students. So if the student is ready and is a good candidate to go, off they go.
Yes, Senator Sheen.
Just a comment, one thing I'd really like to see, and I think maybe you mentioned it already, but JFO, or actually, no, I think it was you suggesting JFO. JFO's insight on this, because I'd like to know how or if this would affect property taxes for each district when they're doing their budgets and it's going through this different mechanism. If there's no impact whatsoever, then great, but if it's negative or positive, it's also good to know that.
Good. Senator Boucher,
Yeah.
wants to say?
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, I think having JFO look at it is a great idea too. From our perspective, it's neutral. It's,
Right, on the
it's-
property
right.
tax piece.
It's neutral
I
on,
But
Senator.
isn't it, given the fixed pot of money, if CTEs are bumping up a little bit, then obviously LEAs have to be bumped down. A little bit. I mean,
well, no,
Just
what
fixed
would
pot
happen
amounts.
is it would, so what happens in the other flexible pathways is my understanding, and here I can rely on our general counsel a little too. My understanding is that with the other flexible pathways, it becomes part of the negotiated overall, I'm sorry that my brain is not working this afternoon. It's been a long time.
Right.
The yield, and so that's part, it ends up becoming part of the shared component of the education fund at the end of the budget process here in the State House. That's my understanding. Simmons, is that correct?
I think Senator Gould has been on a school board, she might be able to weigh in a little bit on this too.
Oh, gosh, I was thinking about the question I was gonna ask, sorry.
Oh, no, please, then ask the question.
My brain is also a little, it's been a long week. Another comment I had from someone in the CTE world was around, because I heard you bring up, flexible pathways, and he was saying how, there's been maybe some gray area in the flexible pathway language in that, the sending districts have sort of the boundaries around the sending districts have been blurred a little bit, so that some sending schools are sending kids to CTEs that are outside of their district. Would that at all be affected with this new funding model? Is there anything?
I need to learn more about that, because I don't know how a district could make a decision about a student that's not in their district, whether they're going or not to a CTE center. So, but, that also might be a question about governance, and that it's still confusing to me, because every student in the current statute belongs somewhere.
Right.
So like,
Yeah, I'll go back and look at his email, but the block grant would change that.
it's not to change major aspects of government.
Okay.
The only thing I might think of that maybe this is what it is that there is current rule that if there's a program that's not offered in your assigned CTE, regional CTE center, that you can go to another CTE center, and that is paid for then. But transportation is not paid for. That's what I always hear. It's not fair because
Right.
they then have to be on their own. The family and the student has to be on their own to get them to that. And I know students take advantage of that. So I know a student, it's often happening, for instance, with the Essex CTE Center because of their dental hygiene program. There's not a lot of dental assistant, there's not a lot of dental assistant programs. In fact, I think we're now down to one because Randolph is gonna retire theirs, hopefully temporary, but they can't find
It's the
staff.
St. James.
to run it.
So we're on section 12, page 14, line 12. These are amendments, proposed amendments to section 50 and 65 of Title 16. So this is the vast majority of section 12's current law. And this is the salary assistance subsection or section. So the first change here is current law is the state board shall reimburse the school district operating a career and technical center for, and then there's some roles that we'll walk through. But this is making that change to the Agency of Education. The roles that the salary assistance that are eligible for the salary assistance is the director of a career tech center, so that's current law. A person whose principal duty is to provide guidance services for career technical students. And there's a proposal to add some kind of helpful language here, such as the director of counseling or guidance. We're gonna go on to page 15.
So if you start just telling me a little bit more about the goal of this section, or the salary assistance.
It has historically been, I guess, a way that the state helped out. Probably my sense would be because it's very hard to recruit folks from industry for CTE, that this was state funds that were provided to help with recruitment and to, keep teachers to get them out of, it's very hard to get them out of industry. They can make so much more.
I understand.
Simmons, do you have any more insight on that one? It's been there for a very long time.
Right. I would just emphasize this is existing law. And as far as our thinking about how to calculate that direct funding allocation, this is built in as part of the base that they receive now. So we would like to see that go forward as well.
Thank you. Senator Weeks.
No,
Okay, great. Please go ahead.
So the next change is on page 15, lines 2 and 3. Another position that would receive salary assistance is a person whose principal duty is to find job training opportunities for students. And then there's added clarifying language such as the co-op coordinator. There's a change on line 10 from state board to agency. And then on
Senator Weeks.
isn't that open the can about rules versus policy? Isn't that, given the conversation we had an hour ago? Who sets policy, who sets rules? Here we are, it's a direct change. Aren't we opening what they can here?
this, so this would be a change that's consistent with the prior change that's made in this bill that you all have discretion to do with it whatever you want. But section 8 on page 9 transfers rulemaking authority from the state board to the agency.
Right.
And so within the context of this draft, that would be a conforming change. But if you were to do something else with those rules, we would need to adjust this language accordingly.
So again, with this bill, it's been proposed that we move rulemaking to the agency.
I just didn't know if we were gonna, when we're gonna address that.
Delineating the powers of that, yeah. Yeah. Up to that.
Conversation.
Senator Boucher, or Secretary Boucher.
Not in
Please.
your life.
Yeah.
Why do we keep? We have to have some humor. I also just wanted to say, I believe like the co-op coordinator, I think this is just instantiating, there are endorsements for these, within the licensure. Purview, and so I think it's just meant to like clarify what the intent of this role is now that it's called something. So when this was written a long time ago, there wasn't something called a co-op coordinator, but now we have something in state rule under the standards board, which is different than the state board of ed, that calls this a co-op coordinator. So I think it's really just meant to clarify that. But this is not a hill that the agency would die on.
Okay.
At all.
So the next change is on page 15, we're still in the same section, salary assistance, lines 15 through 17. So this is how much the salary assistance will be for different positions. So for directors and guidance coordinators, current law is that the salary assistance is 50% of the state average salary and benefits, or 50% of the actual salary and benefits of the individual, whichever is less. This change would strike the actual salary and benefits and just leave it at directors and guidance coordinator salary assistance is 50% of the state average salary for each position reported in the previous year. It's essentially the same change for subdivision B, which is for assistant directors. So currently it's 35% of state average or 35% of the actual salary. This change strikes the actual salary option and just leaves it at the statewide average reported in the previous year. There were some conforming, just some kind of cleanup language, the rest of the changes on page 16, I don't think we need to walk through, they were just kind of edits to conform with drafting convention. Page 17 though is a substantive addition. So actually, if we go back to 16 to just put it in context. Salary assistance for, in order to receive salary assistance, it requires the condition of assistance, as a condition of the assistance. It requires as a condition of assistance that the director, so in order to get that assistance, the director has to do A, B, and then subsection C is new on page 17. Submit position and salary data to the agency through the agency's data collection mechanism and accordance with published data collection timelines. And I believe that that is so that, the agency can actually do those calculations, right? Collect that. Page 17, section 13, line 4, regional CTE districts, notification of supplemental funding. Notwithstanding any provision of law to the contrary, a regional CTE school district shall notify the agency prior to the November 1st, 2025 for fiscal year 2026 and November 1, 2026 for fiscal year 2027, whether the district will propose a district budget to provide supplemental funding beyond what the center will receive as a direct funding allocation in fiscal year 2026 and 2027. And the district shall provide the agency with its draft budget and a rationale for the supplemental funding sought. So I believe that that is to capture if they are proposing funding beyond what they would get under that first section that we walked through.
Well, they would still have the option to bring additional requests to the voters. Really, that's what that is.
Yeah,
Section 14 on page 17, lines 13 and 14 is a repeal of the secondary student tuition statute. That will go into effect on July 1, 2025. So right now, that's the tuition model that we're operating under. When section 10 goes into effect, that section would be repealed. And then to further complicate matters, section 15 is section 1552. Secondary tuition. This section is exactly what is being repealed in section 14. It is current law. So once you repeal, I'll walk you through it.
Sure.
Once you repeal law, you can't just undo the repeal. You have to reenact the whole thing, okay? I don't make the rules, you do. So what in this section, section 15 would not go into effect until July 1, 2026. I believe, do you want to, this is very dangerously close to policy recommendations. I can explain it, but it might be.
So this is because, remember, this is a 2-year transition period. So if the General Assembly decides we don't wanna move forward with the program weights. In addition to the governance that we're gonna be talking about within that 2 years, everything goes back to how it is now. So
It's a repeal of a repeal.
it's a repeal of a repeal,
Okay.
and what it does is say, you know, it gives the General Assembly the, you know, some assurance that, if this is something that is devastating, which we don't think is going to happen, but that if there's no other action, we're gonna go back to the way it is right now. So the 2-year transition period would be over. And we'd be back to the way it is now, which I think we all argue doesn't work. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to actually fix something. Senator Weeks is looking at me very intensely.
No,
He does
that's
that to everything.
the process.
That, this is, there's nothing illegal about any of this, right?
Well,
It's
that's.
something.
Wrap up everything.
Yeah.
Right.
You got counsel.
Damn it, right.
It's really.
This requires everyone to, I think, and I haven't thought this through fully, but I think we would also want to add a repeal of section 10 to occur at the same time that 1552 goes into effect. Otherwise, you would have dual statutes, right? That's not built in here, but I think that's what we would need to do.
Again, to address the same circumstance.
To address, so as written, and on, if you take no further action.
Yeah.
On July 1, 2026.
Yes.
Section 1552, which is the tuition statute, springs back to life automatically. But we haven't done anything with the block grant, with the categorical aid that we're enacting in section 10.
Which would also need to be repealed.
Right, and I think we can build that in here.
Great.
This just requires everyone to be on their game and remember that this is happening.
Yeah.
Nope.
I know it's a lot to be taking in. We're gonna be looking for the agencies to get this over. We're gonna be partnering very closely. This coming week, we'll have, I'm sure, some conversations. I just emailed Ms. St. James and we'll be in touch with you and maybe we can just meet a few times so that when we get back, we will have something that this committee can hopefully be able to move end of the week. Yeah.
Were you done? Did you wanna do?
Took the effective date, I've kind of walked through already the different ones, and actually it's, section 15 would not take effect until July 1, 2027. I think I kept saying 2026, but it's 2027. But everything else, so if I didn't specify, so the change in the funding would take effect July 1, 2025. Section 1552, the tuition section would spring to life again on July 1, 2027, if you don't take any further action, and then everything else in the bill would take effect on July 1, 2024.
So the only change that we've made, we're not looking for a new copy, but the copy that I'm gonna take home is this copy with that little addition about the construction trace. Other than that, this is the draft that you will all be talking about this week with the V's.
Correct.
And then perhaps, when is that meeting?
We haven't scheduled it yet.
Okay.
Because we just met this morning.
But maybe by Wednesday, you and Ms. St. James and I, anybody else who wants to, zoom in and have a conversation just to see where we're.
Sure.
And then maybe on Friday and then be able to bring something next week. I've got the center view of.
Just a comment, which is that we can ruminate over this on break. That's what, you know, we'll have time, but my only issue with the funding changes are that I feel like our communities are still like brushing off from what's happened over the last couple of months, and still trying to get their feet on the ground. And so someone had mentioned it the other day too. I'm just worried that these changes coming on the heels of what we've just experienced might be a bit much. I'm willing to certainly be educated to the contrary, but that's just like a gut reaction that I'm having.
I think it's a really good point. Glad you raised it and maybe there's we need more time or something. Yeah, but yeah, something to think about for sure.
I think when I met, and I would let them speak for themselves, but when I met with the V's this morning, I think in general, they're supportive of this, because I think so far from what they know, and we need to go over this fiscal language in detail. It, the only thing that will change is that this doesn't need to be budgeted into local budgets. That's the only thing that will change.
Which is really a good thing.
What we want.
But we want,
Right.
right. I mean, this is
So-
good, yeah.
Yeah, and I would go a step further and say, and like what happens now is if a student in CTE, for instance, wants to, but let's say a group of them want to go to CTE like in the spring. Like the LEA has to scramble sometimes about like how, where's that coming in the budget? And like there wouldn't be any of that. They wouldn't have to worry about that. Like, because the CTE would already have its money to serve the students. So I think it might be actually a good thing for them. It's almost
I mean, that way it
things
does
for
make
them to
make
worry about.
sense to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Under person.
Yeah, I guess this could be really, really
If you
good.
do a cost benefit analysis, I think to get us, to
Mhm.
get this implemented,
Mhm.
it's gonna benefit.
Did you say I'm impressed? I didn't hear what.
He did.
Okay.
We were talking about the chair, but
No, it's good, it's good
it
work.
is, it is. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Very
Thank
much.
you, Beth.
And thank you for your continued work. Yes, thank you, Cecilia. Okay, just take 2 minutes. I'm gonna need a bathroom break and we'll come back. Did you mind